Hey friends, welcome back. Welcome back to Ketamine Connections. I'm your host, Anna Krishtal, aka your ketamine coach, and today's episode is one that I am really excited to share with you, especially if you or someone you know has ever struggled with chronic pain or felt like your body is working against you. I am sitting down today with the amazing Nori Crain, a transformational and recovery coach with a very unique perspective on chronic illness and chronic pain. Nori is a trauma informed coach with over 8 years of experience and a real passion for helping people reconnect with your body, especially when dealing with the complexities of long term pain. Not only is Nori incredibly knowledgeable about how psychedelic therapy like ketamine can support healing, but also she reframes pain in a way that allows people to build a new relationship with your body. A perspective that I know will change the way you think about chronic illness and healing. In this episode, we explore how ketamine therapy is not just about physical relief, but it's also about choice. The choice to focus on what helps you feel better instead of sinking deeper into what makes you feel worse. Nori shares how ketamine therapy can help people with chronic pain reframe their relationship with their bodies. And we'll dive into a couple of other eye opening concepts, including how the nervous system and emotions can actually influence physical pain. And it's an amazing episode. It's such an amazing conversation. I'm so excited to bring it to you. We'll dive in just a second. And before we do, I want to remind you about something super exciting that I'm offering a subliminal workshop coming up on January 29th. It is the first workshop of 2025. It is the absolute most perfect way to kick off the year with a mindset that aligns your goals and intentions to the subconscious mind. And then you get a personalized subliminal recording. It's going to be magic. I know it is. It's going to sell out. I know it is. So please sign up ASAP, and all the info's in the show notes. So let's get into the conversation with Nori and hear about her incredible approach to healing and chronic pain and empowering the body to feel better through ketamine therapy. We're live. Welcome, Nori.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi. Okay. I begin every single interview with the same question, so I'm going to shoot it to you. If you could tell you before you started all this anything, what would you say?
It's such a good question. I think that if I had to give myself advice in starting ketamine, it would be open to whatever comes up in instead of trying to massage what I think I need out of it. I think the ketamine and psychedelics in general, but ketamine specifically, has this amazing ability to offer you exactly what you need, whether you think you need it or not.
Absolutely. I call it lovingly, because I used to do this a lot, micromanaging your healing. Right? We have the infinite intelligence of the universe. We have the intelligence of the medicine. We have the intelligence of the body, the soul, the spirit, the wisdom of this reality that we're in, and we're sitting over here from our vantage point, usually from not the most centered, grounded place, going, no, 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 do it this way. No, 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 you need to go over.
Mhm.
No, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, that untapped knowledge that our subconscious has that we're unwilling to listen to. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely. And I know you have a really unique story. It's actually, and it's funny, I'm attracting a lot of people to the podcast who have a similar experience, that you came to ketamine for one thing and then another thing unfolded. And because of the unfolding, now you work in the ketamine space. You work as a ketamine coach. You work as a, guide for people to, the before, the preparation and the integration. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of backstory about my experience and why I came to ketamine is that I grew up with two parents that have vastly different personality disorders. And so I had a pretty unstable childhood and a lot of parentification that happened quite early on. And so when I was moving in with my domestic partner to co-parent with his kids, I wanted to, in that lovingly micromanaging healing type of way, I wanted to get rid of all of my childhood trauma and not bring my internalized beliefs and my internalized truths into my relationship and transpose them on my new children. Well, that was somewhat effective. That was somewhat effective. I definitely did a little bit of work with my trauma as a child, but inadvertently, what ended up happening is through my work with the ketamine and through the reframing of trauma and how it impacted my nervous system, it actually ended up doing amazing work for my chronic illness and my chronic pain. Because of that really interpersonal marriage between the autonomic nervous system and the central nervous system. And so through reframing what it meant to be unwell to having a body that's willing to communicate its needs clearly and loudly, I was able to find a little bit of self-compassion and healing through that journey. And I now do a lot of that with my clients as well.
Which part? What is it that you do with your clients? Because you just said 100 things.
Yes, I did. So especially around chronic illness, like people that are coming in for chronic pain, or just kind of differently abled or sometimes disabled by their bodies, is trying to build a new narrative or a new framework in which they're engaging with their body and start to develop an intentional relationship with their body and start to listen to the words and the voice that it's using to communicate its needs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just went through a few weeks of being sick. You and I have been in communication about how whatever is going on, I haven't been able to kick it. And I've had this really intimate, humbling experience of how challenging it is to be nice to myself, to my body, to my partner, to the world around me when I am in full-time pain.
Yes. Yes. I had someone tell me a while back, which has now lived in my psyche rent free for the last probably 6 months or so, which is, I think her quote was, I wake up every day and it's a battle with my body as to who wants to be here and who doesn't. And sometimes before I open my eyes, I've already lost that battle.
Oof.
Yeah. Like that gives me chills to just sit with that again. And there are other days when she wins the battle because she does want to be here. And my nervous system also knows that truth. Sometimes still, but more often than not, the past experience of feeling like nothing you can do is going to change the outcome of your experience and it's only downhill from here. And it has been such an honor to be trusted with helping reframe that experience for so many people.
Yeah. And, we're talking about in this particular moment, we are talking about physical, pain, physical limitations, a physical experience. And I can't help but think about how this relates to any psychological, mental thing. I was just talking to someone today about who's living in a really, really high level of pain about their past, right? So yes, it's impacting their body, but that battle of like who's coming forward, right? Who has the talking stick in my world, whether it's mental or physical, knowing, first of all, even just knowing that there are multiple parts, right? David Schwartz, no bad parts. So just knowing that the thoughts have a little round robin, powwow, and they pass the talking stick of who's getting the main platform, and bringing that forward to clients. Do you feel like most people living with that you working with, obviously, that are living with chronic pain and coming to ketamine, do you find in your experience that they know this, that they know that there is a round robin of considerations?
I think oftentimes starting out, most do not. Maybe in some level of awareness they do. However, I think when I see them, they're oftentimes in such an acute trauma or physical event, whether it be in a fibromyalgia episode or um, a period of time where they're disabled with rheumatoid arthritis or kidney disease or whatever that may be. Some of these things go through phases of being really intense, and some of them are just constantly intense. And when you are trapped in that experience of hopelessness, which is not unlike depression and sometimes is paired with depression, right? That physical limitation of the ability to extend your perspective beyond what feels like the cage that you're currently in is so hard to create capacity for. And when I say capacity, I mean just like having an open enough mindset to know that multiple perspectives can be true at the same time. So we do talk a little bit about that round robin of parts and who has the talking stick. But oftentimes it starts out with just being aware that there's multiple ways to look at the way in which the body is experiencing life and experiencing its needs.
Yeah. I mean, talking about micromanaging, how many of us are raised to micromanage our physical experience, right? I
Mhm.
know for a long time in my life, I said, no, you need this, right? To my body, you need this amount of sleep. No, you need this amount of food. No, you need this amount of exercise. And just the process of switching it and saying, actually, let me tap in and ask, well, what do I want to eat right now? How do I want to sleep? How do I want to move my body, especially being in a body that has cyclical nature with menstruation and things like that.
Mm.
It opened up my world in such an incredible way to have a different experience in my body.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially pulling in that idea of the cyclical nature of the body, whether you're a female bodied or non-binary bodied or masculine bodied person, your body has a cycle. It's about understanding what your cycle is and your caloric intake and your exercise and rest and cortisol and adrenaline and testosterone and estrogen cycles are all roles that are played in that cycle. And it's not the same for every single body, whether you are the same gendered body as another or not. It's all unique. It's like a fingerprint. And so most of us don't often have the time to pause, to take time to learn what that fingerprint is. But one of the unfortunate things that happens with people with chronic illness is their body doesn't give them an option. And that's what I mean by having a body that's willing to communicate clearly. Right. And now, if we're being real with ourselves here, that doesn't start out that way. Oftentimes, our body has to get loud to tell us what we need because we've been ignoring it for so long. That's when we start to look at this idea of a burnt out or chronically dysregulated nervous system, which has all sorts of comorbidities, right? But if you start to see the patterns within your own needs in your body, within your own behaviors, within your own coping strategies, within your own pleasure seeking or dopamine seeking habits, it can be quite informative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm internally giggling right now because when I was living, a high intensity corporate lifestyle in New York City, if I was listening to this conversation, I know for a fact the first rebuttal I would have is, who has time for that? What you're saying is, yeah, nope, don't worry about it. Your body will make time for it with, it's the analogy of, okay, for the body speaking in whispers, right? And it's saying, excuse me, I'm a little tired. Excuse me, I'm a little malnourished. Excuse me, I'm a little overstimulated. And for me personally, I have a long history of bulldozing. Oh, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, and
Yeah.
bulldozing that. And then the body has to start shouting, and it shouts in with all sorts of ways. I'm not going to implant suggestions for people, but it shouts in ways that make it not possible to ignore.
Yes. Yes. I was the poster child for that. I was the first daughter of some very ill people and a people pleasing person, and the first of my siblings to go to college. And I lived in New York City for my undergrad program, and I worked full time and paid my way through college while I was going to college. And I probably pulled 70-hour work weeks for years and years and years and had a compromised immune system from the get go.
Mm,
But eventually, I got so sick, I physically could not get out of bed without collapsing.
wow.
And that's what I mean by your body makes sense. It gets tired of asking nicely. And if we don't listen when it asks nicely, we don't give it much of an option but to get louder in its request for what it needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, ketamine for chronic pain is not talked about very much. And so I love for you to educate us on the basics of that. How does someone coming to ketamine for chronic pain even know that this is available? How do they know if they're to benefit, or how do they make the
Mm,
most of it? Whatever you want to offer us.
yeah, there's a lot of inconsistent data out there for ketamine for chronic illness, especially chronic pain. There is belief that it does impact inflammation to some degree, but it is not, in fact, anti-inflammatory, right? So the elements of the effect of ketamine therapy, and there are people that are subscribing to high dose ketamine therapy or low dose ketamine therapy to treat pain. And it just depends upon what's right for you and the modalities of integration that are being worked with, I believe, is my personal belief. The way in which it really kind of it helps support chronic pain is through the marriage of the autonomic nervous system and the central nervous system. Like, so for example, for those of you that don't know what the autonomic nervous system is, the autonomic nervous system is the part of your body that helps regulate your heart rate, helps regulate your breath, your lung capacity, your neural pathways that are actively firing, your biomechanic usage, and how you move through the body, and how that communicates with your central nervous system through the neural patterns around your body, through like your major nerve endings, like your ulnar nerve and your radial nerve and your sciatic nerve, and all of those, in order to help your muscles fire, help your joints move cohesively. And this is kind of where we start to get into that idea of the body keeps the score. If you have read that book, that's a wonderful book. And that's important here because of the way in which we're talking about reframing pain, right? So with non-illness or non-pain related illnesses, it's a little bit different. But there is a school of thought that unprocessed emotion lives in our body. And when I say it lives in our body, I mean it lives in our musculature system, it lives in our nervous system. Our central nervous system is a predictive pattern recognizing system, right? So what it does is, as we're developing as young people, I want to say the time frame where it like is really starting to develop its coping strategies is through like early childhood. So like pre-K and kindergarten is when we're seeing the most rapid development, right? And so what that looks like is the way in which you have your emotional needs met, your physical needs met, seek safety from danger, feel held and seen by your parents or your teachers or your siblings and your friends. How those patterns are responded to help train your nervous system as to what to look for as far as safety goes. And you've talked about how the subconscious mind is there to keep you safe in previous episodes. The central nervous system is also doing the same thing. It's there to keep you comfortable, it's there to keep you out of danger. And so when we look at it through that lens, the central nervous system is looking for projected perceivable danger. And what that means is when there is something that our nervous system perceives as dangerous, the tools that it has are going to be the tools that it jumps to that worked most effectively last time. That doesn't mean those tools are the most effective tools to use. It doesn't mean those are the most recent tools that we've learned. And so when we jump back from real time, current central nervous system predictive pattern to learned behavior in the past, oftentimes what we're jumping from is executive state to emotional or survival state. And those are three different developmental stages of the brain. And it's really quite challenging as an adult to move from emotional state and survival state all the way back to executive state. It takes practice, it takes intentionality, and it takes a little bit of grit, perhaps, to pull yourself out of reactivity, right? And to implement the real tools that we're using real time.
Oh my God, I love this. I want to also add that the perceived threat might not actually be threatening. That is something that we
Exactly.
learned as a threat when we were children. I want to bring what you just said a little bit down to earth because I out on the brain, I geek out on the all the nervous systems and the all of these things. But there's a quote, I believe it's Ram Dass. I'll give it to Ram Dass.
Mm,
If you think you're so enlightened, go spend a week with your family.
yeah. I think it is Ram Dass. It's such a good quote.
And that's what we're talking about, right? And so what we're talking about is we are contextual beings, right? And
Mhm.
so when we are in the context of, and for those of us, I went away to school. And so I had this lived experience where I'm in college, building my sense of self, my new identity, my is really stepping into adulthood. And then I go to visit my family and I'm a totally different person. And some people, have this for their entire life, right? They are adults and they are, maybe even as grown up as having their own family, their own children. And all of a sudden they're talking to their mother. Why do I feel like a 5-year-old? Right? I'm talking to a caregiver and I'm regressed to my early childhood state because we are contextual beings. And if we don't train ourselves, if we don't do the work to say, okay, trigger response, reroute it, right? What you're
Mhm.
saying is to do that work, to have that grit, to go, okay, really unskilled, this is really old, this is really it's just not cute. That's what I say. I was like, this isn't cute, like stomping my feet and having a temper tantrum.
It's not cute.
Not cute. Unless I'm doing it intentionally in a sort of emotional release exercise by myself to
Mm,
process something. But to be
sure.
in the world, I think we don't need to look far in the media to see adults having temper tantrums.
Not at all.
What we're talking about is rerouting those synaptic connections that live in the body, that live in the system, that are, I often talk about it like bowling, right? Something happens and your
Mm,
bowling ball is in the gutter, like, okay, you got to practice getting it back in the lane, because
yeah.
once it's in the gutter, it's there you go. There's your temper tantrum. There's your activated state. There's your yelling. There's your anger. There's your frustration. There's all these heightened emotions that feel out of control because you haven't practiced controlling them.
Yeah. I have an analogy around a freeway that's much the same. Is that like when the going's good and you're on your own, you're on the highway, you're cruising at 70 miles an hour, and there comes a trigger, and all of a sudden you've accidentally gotten off the freeway onto the frontage road, right? In this analogy, the freeway is the neural pathways that we're using. This can be both positive and negative, right? If we're using the positive neural pathways that we're looking for, the healthy modalities, the healthy management tools, great, hop back on the freeway, right? But if the neural pathway that we're using is perhaps rumination or negative self-talk, then we need to get off the highway. We need to use that frontage road to get more traffic on the frontage road, to build the neural pathway and expand that neural pathway.
Exactly. And I always really like to emphasize this because sometimes I know, again, I'm talking to my past self that would hear this and go, who has time for this? I don't have time for this. Whatever. I'm fine. The cool thing about this is that if you don't use it, you lose it. How many people
Mhm,
have taken a foreign language in high school that they don't remember because you didn't keep up with it, you didn't use it? And so that's the same thing that's happening with an old way of being. Okay, someone used to say this and I would default to anger and yelling. Okay, now I'm going to get off the highway, I'm going to use that frontage road, I'm going to reinforce this other road. Guess what? That becomes your that kindness,
mhm,
compassion, curiosity, that becomes your highway. And that old way, it goes away. There's only so many synaptic connections we can have in the brain, and so the old ones fall away, so you don't have to do this forever.
mhm. Well, and the interesting thing is the way in which this relates to pain in the body, right? And if we're talking about the nervous system and how it relates to pain within the body, we're talking about emotion and our patterns within living within motion. And if we have a big and emotional response that's then going to trigger our behavioral patterns, this is how it relates to pain, right? If we have the same pattern that we respond to the same type of trigger around anger, right? So if we think about the physiological response to anger, typically we get hot. Oftentimes our chest will start to feel tight or pressure, whether it's expanding pressure or compressing pressure, right? Our neck sometimes will often get tight. That is all the central nervous system working with the autonomic nervous system here, right? To our emotional state. Then now on top of that, we now have the story response that we're having. So the story that our nervous system is saying, hey, remember last time we felt this way, X, Y, or Z was doing this to me, right? Now we are deepening the neural pathway. We are following the same pattern, which is then going to exacerbate the same physiological response, which will build. Just like massage is accumulative, having an emotional response on the same neural pathway is going to be accumulative in your body.
Absolutely. So, okay, ketamine for chronic pain.
Mhm.
Is what you're saying, is all of this saying a building towards this notion that yes, ketamine, we don't know if it's anti-inflammatory, we don't know if it's physically helping with chronic pain, but is it helping to deal with the emotional pain that is often related to the chronic pain?
Yes. So to answer that more directly, at the risk of naming the elephant in the room that every chronic illness person feels gaslit by, chronic illness is in some ways psychosomatic. That does not mean that your pain, that your bodily experience is not real. What it means is that there are emotional ties that exacerbate your physiological response, right? That doesn't mean you're making it up. It doesn't mean that you have pain because you're anxious. It doesn't mean you have gout because you don't have self value or self trust, right? What it means is that there is an emotional state that triggers the experience in your body to be more intense.
Mhm.
And so that is the way in which we're looking at this through psychosomatic health, right? So that's not to say chronic illness is in fact overarching in your mind, right? That's not what I'm saying here. What I am saying is there are components that exacerbate your physiological response, your physical experience to make it more intense when we are under a lot of mental and emotional strain, whether it be current mental and emotional strain or historical mental and emotional strain.
It's so nuanced, and I really appreciate the care that you're giving to this because I have a mother who is chronically ill. My mom has MS. She's been diagnosed for about 21 years now. I've been on my own journey of going from the early my mom is the one who brought me to the spiritual path, I wouldn't be practicing yoga or doing any of this work if it wasn't for my mom's illness. And in the early days when we started as a family learning this, right, the psychosomatic connection, I went through a long period of time where I blamed her for her own illness. And I said,
Mm,
you are creating this, go fix it, go create something else. And I really had to, first of all, I mean, lots of lessons for me there as a child of someone with a chronic illness. One, take myself out of it. I cannot do anything for her. I can only love and support her through her own journey. And two, really recognize It's real, not
Mm,
made up. And sometimes when we get too much in the new age, too much in the woo, too much in the spiritual, there is this thing that you're being so beautifully eloquent about, of gaslighting people with a chronic illness, saying that they're making it up, go make up a different reality. And that's not what we're saying here. What we're saying here is actually a different rule in the brain, Hebb's law in the brain, that says where attention goes, energy flows. And if you have a
yes.
chronic condition, it is real. And if you sit and for 20 hours a day, you sit and you repeat to yourself, I'm in pain, I'm in pain, I'm in pain, I'm in pain, I'm in pain. You're sending your attention and your energy and your focus, and you're telling your brain through other mechanisms in the brain, this is the most important thing. Whereas there are
Hmm.
other things that you can do that ketamine facilitates to switch the focus. And maybe you can't do it all the time. We can't do anything all the time. All of this stuff that we're talking about is a practice. But if you recognize, oh, there are certain foods, certain thoughts, certain emotions that help me feel just 1% better, and I'm going to use the neuroplasticity, the heightened neuroplasticity of the ketamine to switch my focus, right? To turn this
Yes.
highway into that. That's what we're talking about.
Exactly. And I do want to be really mindful with this idea of medical gaslighting, because it's not just something that happens in the medical field and within our social culture. We also end up internalizing the self-gaslighting, where we ourselves at some point, because we've heard doctors and our loved ones and our friends separate from ourselves, or ask us if or maybe tell us that it's maybe not so real, then we start to question our own reality. And that's what's really scary, is that we start to listen to the outside perspective about what our lived experience is, more so than our own. And if I want clients to get, or even listeners or social media followers to hear anything at all, it's trust your lived experience. Your body wants to have a relationship with you. And the more you are intentional with having a relationship with your body, so that it feels like it has your attention, it has your care, it has your love, and it is your priority to love it fully, the better your body will feel.
Amen. Absolutely. And so, what are some of the integration techniques that you help clients with, specifically with chronic pain?
Yeah, so I think it depends upon what someone's daily schedule is like, right? What they have capacity to make space for, whether it's a stay-at-home mom who's got a small child, or whether it's an entrepreneur that's running multiple businesses. It really depends upon what they have space for. But typically the first place I start is, can you create 5 minutes first thing in the morning where you prioritize yourself and your body's care above everyone and everything else? So for some, that looks like taking a morning bath while they have their coffee. For others, that looks like taking their very stereotypical morning shower to get ready for work, but intentionally touching their own body with love and care. So while they're washing their hair, imbuing their touch for themselves with love, with sensational care, with deep reverence for the job that the body is doing for you. We get so caught up into this perspective as a chronically ill person that our body is doing something to us, when our body is really just being a body. It's just being the animal that we're in. And some animals are more efficiently put together than others. Mine is not a terribly efficient animal. What I will say is it's far more efficient when I give it the resources that it needs, right? So I have this analogy. I think I saw it on Instagram as a meme, but I've been thinking about it off and on, and I use it all the time in my practice, which is, if you have chronic illness, there is a certain degree of dissonance that is sometimes helpful to have within our perspective, because so many people feel like they're walking through life in a meat suit, right? I don't perhaps feel like I live in a meat suit, but that's oftentimes because my body has needs or desires that don't feel like they're in alignment with me, right? Like oftentimes it feels like my body doesn't want to be here when I for sure want to be here. And when I think about what that anecdotal looks like for me. My consciousness is the caretaker of the animal in confinement.
Hmm.
And so if I am the zookeeper of the animal needs enrichment. The animal needs exercise. The animal needs social time and touch. The animal needs nutrition, sunlight, community, right? The animal needs enrichment. What that type of enrichment is dependent upon you. And my consciousness is in charge of caring for that animal. And that is the anecdote that gets me through every day.
And the ketamine helps, right? It
It really
makes
does.
taking care of that animal, right? We can all think about different ways of approaching a job, right? With
Yes.
resentment and anger and impatience, with gratitude, compassion, and responsibility comes to mind, right? I am responsible for taking care of this animal, this meat suit, and doing that from a place of devotion and reverence rather than burden and impatience.
Yeah. I mean, I think for those of us with pets, it's a little easier to extend that idea, right? Because we are the caretaker of our pet at home and they're dependent upon us for their meals. They're dependent upon us for their walks, their social time. But even for those of us that don't have pets, we are still in we are still so fortunate to be in a consciousness that has space to be able to hold two perspectives at once or more sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what reframing is all about, is to find self-compassion and to find self-acceptance, to find self-gratitude and appreciation. I'm trying to remember who said it. I think it might have been Esther Perel, but she made this offhanded comment in one of her podcasts, which was, we can't shame ourselves into healing. We can only heal through self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing goes for our bodies, right?
Well, where is the healing actually taking place if not in the body?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Beautiful. That feels like the perfect endpoint for all of this, right? We cannot shame ourselves into healing, loving ourselves, compassion towards ourselves. That's going to give people a lot to sit with. I love these little one-liners that we get from, sages and philosophers and wise people that we can sit with for our entire life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. Is there anything else that you want to throw in the mix before we sign off?
Mm, I think the only thing I would add is that if you are new to psychedelics, if you're looking at going into psychedelic therapy to treat chronic illness or chronic pain, trust your body through the process. Sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming for the nervous system, and so when that's the case, it's okay to slow down your treatment protocols. I see that a lot where many clinics will have you coming multiple times a week or once a week. And sometimes the body needs more rest time in between, and they need a week in between, or they need 2 weeks in between. That's okay. And nobody knows your body as well as you. And so advocate for the rest that it needs.
Beautiful. I really appreciate that. And I so appreciate you and your wisdom and your sharing. We'll have all of your links and things in the show notes so people know exactly where to find you. And thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here with you today, Anna.
Yeah, you too, Nori. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Ketamine Connections. I hope you found our discussion insightful and empowering. Remember that understanding the subconscious mind and how to make the most of ketamine therapy can truly transform someone's healing journey. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to share it with your friends and family and anyone who might benefit from this information. So few people considering ketamine therapy are fully educated about its potential and the impact that it has on the subconscious mind. Your share could be the key element to their transformation. Don't forget to subscribe to Ketamine Connection so that you never miss an episode. And if you have a moment, I absolutely adore reading your reviews. So your feedback really helps me feel like this is an engaging exercise. Otherwise, I just feel like I'm talking into empty internet space. So your review really helps light me up and also helps me reach more audience. So I would appreciate one if you're willing. And please use the link below to submit any questions or topics that you would like covered. I cannot wait to hear from you and to co-create this journey together. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and embrace the possibilities that are available in this moment right here, right now. Thanks so much. See you next time on Ketamine Connections.